Well, good afternoon to all of you. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful Sabbath day. We do have a few people missing because of the freeways being blocked and people out of town for a wedding over the weekend. But God says where one or two are gathered together, He's in the midst. So He's in the midst of us today. And we're thankful for that. And Jesus, all of that prophecy that He gave to His disciples, and it was recorded for our good, He told His disciples to watch and pray always that you might be worthy to escape all the things that are come to pass before the end of the age. That's sort of a paraphrase of Luke 21, verse 36. They had just observed the stones of the temple there, and Jesus said not one would be left upon another, that they would be turned down. Many people believe Jesus was talking about what happened in 70 AD when the temple was torn down. But as we know, this prophecy is dual, and it wasn't speaking primarily of 70 AD, but of the times after that. So what I want to cover today is, I've titled my sermon, split sermon, Observing the Signs of the Times. And believe me, we have lots of signs going on today. If you watch the news and observe what's happening, you know that's true. So let's turn to Matthew 24, and I realize that many of you have read this many times. I can't count how many times I've read Matthew 24, but it's good to read it once again. So if you'd like to turn there, we'll read a little bit of it. Verse 1 of Matthew 24 said, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and His disciples came to show Him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said, you see all these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone will be left upon another that shall not be torn down. And as I previously said, people say, oh, he's talking about 70 AD, when the Greeks came in and tore down the temple. Now, as He said on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came privately, saying to Him, tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceive you. Many will come in my name, saying I am Christ, and will deceive many. And we have that today. People all over the airways saying, Jesus is the Christ, and I'm going to tell you all about Him, and so on. So we have, that part has come to pass. He says, many will come in my name. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes. And we've had all of those right along. Then He says, verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And many will be offended and betray one another and hate one another. And we've had a portion of that already. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. We have them all around us. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Of course, you know that we have a part in that. We're attempting to preach the gospel to any that will hear it. Then verse 15 says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let those who are on the mountain flee to the... Wait a minute. He says, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So My question to you at this point is, what about this desolation of abominations? Was there such a thing set up in 70 AD? Well, you'll probably say no, but did you know that it was tried? They really tried to set up an abomination of desolation before 70 AD. I'd like to read for you now what Josephus wrote. And Josephus writes kind of strange, so I might have trouble reading this. He said, now Caius Caesar, and that's the official name of Caligula. Caligula was his nickname. Caligula means small boots. I don't know why they call him that, but that was his name. It says, now Caius Caesar did so grossly abuse the fortune he had arrived at as to take himself to be a god, and to declare and to desire to be so called also. To cut off those of the greatest nobility out of the country, he also extended his impiety as far as the Jews. Accordingly, he sent Petronius, which was a Greek officer, with an army to Jerusalem to place his statues in the temple. That's statues of himself, because he declared himself to be a god, and commanded him that in case the Jews would not admit to them, he should slay those who opposed it and carry all the rest into captivity. That's from Antiquities, book 15, page 403. The Roman writer Tacitus added that Caius commanded the Jews to place his effigy in the temple. Josephus also records that the Jews pleaded with Petronius. They said, don't do this. Don't place this abomination in the temple. And what happened was Petronius was so taken by the zeal of the Jews that he said, well, I'm not going to do it. So he refused to do it. Now, when Caligula heard about that, he sent word that Petronius was to be killed immediately, slaughtered immediately. But it didn't happen, because before the message reached Jerusalem, because the seas were rough, Caligula died. Did God kill him? I don't know. But anyway, he died, and Petronius never was put to death. And there was no abomination put in the temple. So what does that prove? That proves beyond doubt that Jesus was talking about a time other than 70 AD, because no abomination was set up in the temple. So I have a few points. I have 7. I hope I can get through them. I'm not going to elaborate on every one very much. So the first thing we know that's going to happen is what we call the Great Tribulation. That's also called the time of Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, verse 7. So when are we going to know the tribulation is here? The answer is, I don't know. Because we just have to watch conditions, and we have to make a judgment, and we're going to know in a certain way that it's here. One thing you won't hear is that on the national news, they say the Great Tribulation has started. You won't hear that. You know, how many of you heard the story of the frog in water that you're putting in lukewarm water? How many of you heard that story? Forget that story, it's false. That story's been told 100 times, but every biologist will tell you it is not true. The temperature mechanism of a frog is so sensitive that a frog would never do that. When the temperature got too high, he would get out of that water if he had a way to do it. But what is true is the effect that people are trying to illustrate is that, when you get used to something, it could get worse and worse and worse, and somehow you don't realize it's getting worse and worse. They also call that the Stockholm syndrome. So the effect of the frog in water is true. It's just that the story itself is false. So we need to be aware of when that great tribulation is beginning, and exactly how we know, I can't tell you that. Number two, we need to understand that the center of attention of the world is going to turn to Jerusalem. The attention will turn to Jerusalem. And actually, I didn't realize that would happen when I was preparing this. A war started in Jerusalem, and of course that's nothing new for Jerusalem. We've had war upon war. But let's turn to Zechariah 12, verse 1 to 3, to see what was prophesied for Jerusalem. Zechariah 12, verse 1. And it's near the end of the minor prophets, pretty close to where you get before you get to Matthew. Zechariah 12, verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundations of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it will happen in that day. By the way, in that day, when you see that phrase in the Old Testament, very, very often when it says in that day, it means the last days. There's very few times where it doesn't mean that, but there are a few. So it says, verse 3, and it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples, not just Israel, all peoples. That means all peoples of the earth. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, so all nations of the earth are gathered against it. All nations of the earth. That's an interesting statement there. So that's one thing we're going to have to keep our eyes open for when the attention of the world turns to Jerusalem. In Luke 21, it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that it is nigh. Actually, I don't want to read it, but Zechariah 14, you can read that sometimes. It says basically the same thing as Zechariah 12. The third thing I would like to point out is the king of the south and the king of the north must appear. And for that, we have to go back to Daniel 11, and Daniel 11 is a long book, and I'm going to read that much of it, but I encourage you, if you're interested in this, that you should read Daniel 11. You should read all of Daniel. It's a very, very interesting book. So I want to start reading in verse 40, Daniel 11, verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, that is the king of the north, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, that is, Jerusalem and the environs there. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. And if you see those names there, you mean that shows you that's the area that's called Jordan. So who are the kings of the north, and king of the north, king of the south? Well, I can tell you, you can go on the UCG website and search, and I don't think you'll come across as the king of the north is this, and the king of the south is this. They won't tell you that because you don't actually know entirely. What we do know or feel pretty strongly about is that the king of the north will be a combine in Europe, maybe the UC. Anyway, there'll be a combine of about 10 nations in Europe, and they will be the king of the north. The king of the south, very likely, and some people in UCG have said this, that it may be some country driven by Islam. And that's what we feel. It'll be the so-called Christian of the north and the Islam conglomerated in the south. That's about all we know, but still, that is something we need to be watching for. Number 4, one thing we need to be watching for is the preeminence of the Catholic Church in Europe, because as we understand it, in the scriptures that pointed out that the Catholic Church will be the driving force behind this so-called King of the North. Let's turn to Revelation 17. I don't have any trouble finding Revelation, but it's always so close to the back cover that I can't make it flip right. Revelation 17, verse 1 says this: Then one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot that sits on many waters. And if you're familiar with symbolism in the Bible, you know that a great harlot is symbolic of one who doesn't obey God, doesn't understand God's precepts, and so on. And it says, sits on many waters. Waters is a symbol for people. So here is a great harlot sitting over many people, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. That's why he calls her a harlot, because fornication is dealing with this harlot. And the inhabitants of the earth are made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And I'm sure you've read that all before. But let's continue a little farther. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness and saw a woman sitting as a scarlet beast, which is full of names of blasphemy, having 7 hands and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones, and so on. I can't read all of that because I'm going to run out of time. I would like to turn to Isaiah 47 and read you just a little bit there. Again, I suppose many of you longtime members have heard most of this before, but it's good to be reminded again and again of these things, because we're living in the times when this is actually coming to pass. Isaiah 47, verse 1, Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Who is that? The same one we read about in Revelation 17, very same personage. O virgin daughter of Babylon, sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal, remove your veil, take off your skirt, uncover your thigh. This is all symbolic language. Pass through the rivers, your nakedness shall be uncovered. Yes, your shame will be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not arbitrate with a man. For as our Redeemer, the Lord God of hosts, his name is the Holy One of Israel. Sit, silence, and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called. Now notice what this lady is called, the Lady of the Kingdom, says. I was angry with my people. I have profaned my inheritance and gave them unto your hand. You shall have no mercy or the elderly. I'm not coming to, it's a little farther down. Let's drop down to verse 8. Verse 8 is what this woman is saying in her mind. Therefore hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, who dwell secretly and say in your heart, here's what this lady says in her heart, I am, and there is no one else beside me. I shall not know the loss of children. So this almost undoubtedly is talking about the great church and her children, and you know who her children are. The Catholic Church has those who came out of her, and the Catholic Church considers those her children. So someday those are going to come back. We feel pretty certain that it will happen. So that's one thing we need to keep our eye on, the preeminence of the Catholic Church in Europe. My next point is a real short one because we're doing it right now. It says the gospel is to be preached in all the nations, and that's what we're doing today. That's what we strive to do. That's why we are on the internet, on television, on the printed word. We're preaching the gospel to all the nations. Now, are we going to be able to finish that and do the job? Probably not. So the two witnesses very likely will finish that. That's about all I want to say for that particular point. My next point is the preeminence and power of the USA will be broken. And as much as we hate to think about that, that has to happen. It really does. Let's go to Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28, and we're going to just read a few verses here, because it's a very long chapter. The first many verses cover the blessings that God promised to Israel, and by extension, us, the U.S. and Britain, and Canada, and so on. He promised to us if we would obey, that all these blessings would come on us. And you certainly need to read all of that, but I don't have time today. Let's drop down to verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God and observe carefully all his commandments and statutes which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And that's what we're seeing today. Cursed shall you be in the city, cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall you be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall you be the fruit of your body and the produce of your land, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flocks. And it just continues like that. And we're seeing the results of that today. Now let's drop down to verse 43. Notice what it says here. An interesting section. We're still in the section talking about the curses that is going to happen because of disobedience. It says, the alien who is among you shall rise higher and higher, and you shall come lower and lower. He shall lend to you, but you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the eternal your God. That's all I have time to read, but we're seeing that more and more every day. If you know what's happening in our government today, look at how this is happening. Just one example I can give you. We've had orders to cut back on production of oil, and the Keystone Pipeline, they killed that process and killed, I can't remember how many jobs, 1,200 jobs, something like that. And have also attacked the fracking business, which we get a lot of our oil by fracking and so on. And, people think oil is just for gasoline and that kind of thing. Actually, gasoline, only 19% of a barrel of oil is used to make gasoline. The rest of it is to make other things. We have over 6,000 products that we use almost on a daily basis that are made from petroleum. Every piece of plastic, and I couldn't come close to name all the things that we use petroleum for. Just almost everything, cosmetics, medical supplies, and so on and so on. Another kind of a silly thing that's been done is to defund the police. What sense does that make? Let's turn to Isaiah 3, and we'll see that this was prophesied. Isaiah 3, we're just going to read a few verses here. Isaiah 3, beginning in verse 1. It says, "For behold, the Lord, the God of hosts, takes away from Jerusalem and from Judah." And just because he says Jerusalem and Judah, that doesn't mean it doesn't spread to all of Israel. It does. What happens to them happens to Israel as well. By extension, he's talking about the extended Israel. "The stock and the store, the whole supply of bread, the whole supply of water, the mighty man and the man of war." See, he's going to take those away from Israel. "The judge and the prophet, the diviner, the elder, the captain of 50, the honorable man, the counselor, the skillful artisan, the expert enchanter." I don't know why they need that, but he said, I'm going to take all of that away. He says, "I will give children to be your princes. I will give children to be your princes, and babes shall rule you." Do you think that's happening today? Our president's government wants to redo the Supreme Court. That's one of the most stable institutions we have in this country, and yet they want to dilute it and make it ineffective. They want to make Washington, D.C. a state, and on it goes. But the point is, we have people making foolish statements, foolish decisions, I should say, today. So number 7 to watch is our own spiritual condition. Actually, that's what Luke 21:36 says. I want to read Luke 21:36 out of the ESV. No, I guess I copied the NASB. Same difference, they say virtually the same thing. But keep on the alert at all times, speaking to us personally, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are about to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. The King James, where it says strength, it says you might be worthy. It's a very poor translation. We can't become worthy. We need spiritual strength to withstand these things that are coming to pass. So by way of conclusion, let me just say that the most important thing to watch is our own personal spiritual well-being. We need to be close to God. We need to be studying His Word continually. We need to be praying continually and drawing close to God. That's the most important thing that we can watch.